There are countless examples of the miscarriage of justice in the annals of history. And my wee bit of history today is going to focus on one of those that it makes it all the more interesting because it actually happened in my backyard. So my story is going to culminate on May 8, 1862, with the hanging of a husband and wife, young immigrant family from Ireland. And historians will agree that although religion's never the sole cause of world conflicts, it often plays a big element. And if we look at Upper Canada at the time, the majority of the population was Anglo-Saxon Protestants, and a small minority were Irish Catholic. And those conflicts exist to today. Now, they're not quite as dramatic as it was in 1862, but I can relate a fairly recent situation where a friend of mine grew up in a small village in eastern Ontario, and they were Catholic, and they had a hog farm. And on that hog farm, they would have to spread a lot of manure, of course. Now, there's an optimal time to spread that manure, but they opted to spread it 1 week before the May 24th weekend. And the reason his father, my friend's father, picked that date was on the 24th of May every year, they had an orange parade in this small village. So 1 week before, they would spread all the manure that they stored all winter, even though it wasn't the optimal time for fertilizing the fields, so that by the time the orange parade rolled around, the smell of the pig manure would permeate the entire village. So, I mean, it's kind of a benign way, I guess, of, Thoreau might call it civil disobedience. Although very aromatic, he was making a statement to the Protestants in the neighborhood. So the major players in this are Mary and Richard Elward. They've immigrated from Ireland, they're Catholic. They settled near Guelph, and then they moved to just a few miles north of us, actually, near Calidar, and then ultimately settled on a homestead near Bancroft. And on the other side of the road, the other major players are William Monroe and his son Alexander, and they are staunch Anglo-Saxon Protestants. So it starts off well enough. The Elwards sell them a few chickens. The chickens keep getting out of their yard, crossing the road and getting into their newly planted wheat field, which back in the day took a lot of time to clear the trees and plant the seed, and the chickens are cleaning it up. Anyway, that's just one element, but as the conflict grows and they come to loggerheads, at one point the Elwards can accuse the Monroes of throwing a dead dog down their well. Well, the Monroes, of course, denied that accusation, but a few days later, Monroe's walking down the road looking for a cow, and he happens to say to Mary, who's out in her yard, he says, "How's your soup tasting?" So it's growing, and it's going to culminate in May of 1862 when the Monroes get home for supper, and his wife says, "I heard a shot across the road today, and we got a hen missing." And so they storm across the road. Now, at the time, Richard's arrived home because he's out doing odd-sod jobs for more affluent homesteaders just to make ends meet. And he's holding their just a few-day-old baby on his lap. They got 2 daughters as well, older daughters. And Mary's cooking supper. And he storms up and he bangs on the cabin door and he wants his hen back. And he says, "Did you shoot my hen?" And Richard says, "I didn't, but I wish I had." Anyway, it's getting pretty rough. He says, "Well, I'm not leaving this farm. They've ordered them off until I get my hen." And so off he storms out into their wheat field. Well, Richard comes out of the cabin toting a shotgun, and in his belt he's got tucked a double-barrel pistol. Anyway, he approaches them, they're arguing, he points the gun at William. William grabs the muzzle and knocks it out of his hand, and Richard pulls this pistol out of his pocket, and as he shoots, the son turns, this Alexander Monroe turns, and he shoots him in the back of his, I believe, right shoulder. He runs off to home bleeding profusely. Now it comes to fisticuffs. These guys are rolling around in the dirt, they're cuffing at each other. Mary comes out of the cabin, picks up a scythe that she'd been using that day, runs out in the field in defense of her husband, takes a couple of swipes at Monroe, gives him one cuff in the side of the scalp and one in his arm. He runs off home bleeding profusely. So the Monroes are laying on their cabin floor. Well, Alexander's going to survive this shotgun wound. I think they took 29 pellets out of his left shoulder, I believe. But William Monroe, Sr., he's not going to survive this. He survives for 12 days and passes away. So you got to think of the time period. They're about 65 miles away from the village of Madoc, and they need to get the coroner. Well, that's going to take 2 or 3 days to get there, 2 or 3 days back. The coroner arrives, and yep, he writes in his report, Monroe's dead, and I think he succumbed to the wound in his head. And at that point, the story gets really bizarre, because a warrant's issued, sheriff comes out, and they arrest Mary and Richard. And now he's taking them back to Belleville to the jails to be tried. And well, he gets as far as Madoc again, 65 miles from their homestead, and he needs some refreshments and an overnight before he starts the next leg of the journey to Belleville. And somehow, unbeknownst to him, the physical evidence for this crime go missing. So the scythe's gone, the shotgun's gone. The pistol was still kept in the Monroe house because the younger fellow had picked it up, I believe, in the melee. So they got no physical evidence. They're thrown in jail, and there's a whole outcry by the public that said, well, this was self-defense, and they've been charged with murder, and Richard had nothing to do with it. There's a plea by the Catholic community to have mercy on them, perhaps lower the charge for Mary to manslaughter, and unconditionally release Richard, who really, he didn't kill anybody, but he's charged with murder, and the trial begins. The trial is going to be presided over by the Honorable W.H. Draper. Now Draper is a staunch Protestant, and he has absolutely no use for the Catholic religion. That's the first nail in their coffin. He's also a member of the Family Compact, and that gets into a really interesting part of Canadian history, is the Rebellion of 1837. And that's definitely a story for another day. Almost a happier story than this particular one. So a lot of things go wrong. First and foremost, they have no physical evidence. All the witnesses that were supposed to come forward don't show up. The one that does has a pretty negative effect on Mary, and she was reported to say that Mary had indicated that I didn't mean to hit him in the head, I meant to hit him in the neck and cut his bloody head off. That did not go well for her. But as I said, through all of this, the Catholic Church and even a lot of the Protestants were trying to get these people, at least their sentences, reduced. But the judge is not going to hear any part of that. I'm pretty confident he had his mind made up before that gavel to call to order the court ever took place. Anyway, the jury comes back. They only deliberated for about an hour and a half. They came back with the guilty verdict on both Richard and Mary. Richard didn't kill anybody, but he's just been charged and convicted with murder, and the judge sentenced them to be hung by the neck until dead. So on December the 8th, 1862, on the time they were supposed to come out was delayed by about 3 hours. But in the interim, over 5,000 people, and I tried to get my head around that, 1862, middle of the American Civil War, that many people made their way by horse and buggy or foot to Belleville to watch this public hanging. And reportedly a bitter cold day, and there were a number of counts of people actually getting frostbite. So there were a number of delays. There was an appeal that was turned down. There was a number of delays, but one of the ones that I found sort of comical, if you can find humor in such a sad situation, is that somebody had forgotten to sew the linen hoods that they were going to put over their heads before they pulled the trip rope. Anyway, they're led up onto the gallows. Now enter a character, Father Michael Brennan, also an Irish immigrant. And he's standing before the crowd, and he's pleading for the crowd to beg for mercy for the lives of Mary and Richard. They neither want to hear or see him. They don't hear his words. They came there to see a public hanging, and at the allotted time, the hangman trips the trap doors, and the Elwards drop to their death. The onlookers that day certainly got their wish, but because of the size of the crowd, it was decided to leave the bodies hang for, I believe it was an extra 25 minutes, so that people in the back could make their way to the front. Anyway, a sad day for a young couple in their 20s with 3 children. Father Brennan reportedly collapsed on the gallows. At 3 o'clock that afternoon on the 8th, they were loaded into a couple of rough coffins on a wagon, and that wagon proceeded to St. Michael's Parish on Church Street, Belleville. The church is still there, the cemetery is still there. Father Brennan had recovered from his collapse, and he gave a fiery, tear-filled speech to the congregation, and apparently the church was packed to standing room only. He made a plea for the young children, so the 2 oldest daughters, I don't know their ages, but they were adopted by a couple in the congregation, and another family adopted the baby who would have been 3 to 4 months old at the time. Anyway, that's a wee bit of history, and certainly a sad bit of history, and I'm going to make my way to the fort, light a fire, and see if I can come up with a happier tale for the next one.